Hi, I'm Kelly and I'm here to tell you about your Coate Air system. What you have here is a 4-compartment system. The first compartment is known as your trash compartment or trash tank. It's where all the wastewater that leaves your home initially comes into your system. When it comes into this compartment, it settles into 3 different layers. The first layer being the sludge layer, the second being the liquid, and the third being the scum. Once it does that, it settles down, the liquid comes into here. About 40% of treatment happens in this compartment. Comes into here, which is known as your motor or aeration compartment. Your motor or aeration compartment, the purpose of the motor is to oxygenate or aerate the waste so that the bacteria that lives within this system can thrive and break down that liquid wastewater further. When we come to this compartment, we always want to make sure that your motor is operating properly and that it is warm to the touch. We also have an infrared thermometer gun to take the temperature of the motor and compare it to the outside riser wall to ensure that it's been running proper cycles. After this stage of treatment, it comes into your clarifier compartment, which is also known as your settling compartment. When it comes into here, anything that is a solid will still come back into the motor compartment for additional treatment. Otherwise, once it's broken down further by the bacteria that lives within this compartment, it comes up into a baffle, an outlet baffle that we ensure that is intact, and leaves this compartment by way of a PVC channel. Once it leaves this compartment, it comes into the final stage of treatment, which is known as your upflow filter. Your PVC channel comes into this compartment by way of pipe, drops straight down to the bottom. Comes a little bit, just not quite to the bottom. The wastewater filters out of the bottom and up through empty space into the bed of gravel for extra treatment. Once it reaches the top of the gravel, it starts to leave the system. Before leaving the system, you actually have what's called a chlorination treatment system. That chlorination treatment system, also known as a chlorinator tube, is stocked with wastewater chlorine tablets. The wastewater chlorine tablets are not the same as swimming pool tablets, as they are less harsh and more environmentally friendly. Once that goes through that tube, by way of little slits in the tube, it leaves the system and discharges out into the environment. Okay, now we're going to come back and we're going to take a look throughout the system. We're going to take a look here at the first compartment, your trash compartment or trash tank. And we want to make sure that everything's good to go here. First thing we look at is your lid. We want to make sure that everything's intact, that it's not creating any safety hazards, there aren't any cracks or deterioration. If it is, we always make note of it, that way you're aware of it. Next thing we look at is the riser. The riser is what sits on top of the tank and the lid sits on top of. We want to make sure that it's elevated a little bit above ground, that way the lid sits on there safely. We want to make sure that it's not shifted at all so that outside dirt, debris, etc. can't come in, and that it's not a safety hazard as well. We also check the top of the tank there to check the integrity, make sure that everything looks good there. Then we look at the wastewater itself. When we look at that, we want to see if there's a thick layer of scum, which right now there's not, and we want to make sure that it doesn't necessarily look like it needs to be pumped. If there is a thick layer of scum, we always recommend having it pumped or having it looked at to see if it does need to be pumped. Now we come to the motor compartment. When we come here, we want to make sure, once again, we check the condition of the lid and the risers, make sure everything's good there, and make note if there's anything amiss. Then we come to the motor. When we come to the motor, if it's in the event that it's not running when we come up to inspect it, we first touch it to check the temperature to verify if it's been running proper cycles. In the event that it's warm, which this one is, then the next thing we would do is turn it on manually with the timer. We do make note in the event that it is overly warm or it's cold, because that could indicate an underlying issue. Then we come to the airline. When we come to the airline, we want to make sure that everything's connected properly, that there aren't any holes, no air leaks, and that it goes all the way down to the bottom, to the top of the tank, and everything's connected. Once we do that, then we come to the air filter. We want to make sure, if in the event that there's any deterioration, that it's missing, or that it's dirty, we make note of it. Then we finally come to the plug. We want to make sure that everything's intact and sound. Now we've come to our third compartment, or clarifier compartment. Once again, we ensure that the lid and risers are in good condition. We do make note if we see any cracks. Once we get to this compartment, we want to, since we've turned on the motor over here, we listen for aeration. We want to make sure that we hear aeration going on in the motor compartment. If we don't hear aeration or bubbling, that indicates that there's an underlying issue with the motor compartment or airline itself. This compartment, everything wastewater comes into and settles down. This is a settling compartment where it treats further with the bacteria that's in here. Once it's settled down, the liquid that comes up in the compartment will actually come up through the baffle here, which we once again want to make sure is intact, which this one is, comes up and leaves this compartment by way of a PVC channel. And now we've come to the final stage of treatment, your upflow filter. Once again, we take a look at the lid and the risers, make sure everything's good there. We do make note if we notice any sort of deterioration within this compartment, that way it can be addressed. All wastewater leaves the clarifier compartment and comes into here by way of a PVC channel. The PVC channel you see here sinks almost straight down to the bottom, and wastewater will filter out of the bottom of the channel and up through the bed of gravel that you see in here. Once it does that, it reaches the top. The effluent, as it goes to leave the system, we want to make sure that it is clear and clean as possible. In the event that your motor is not operating properly, or your timer is not, and your system's not treating the way it should, you may see a discoloration of gray-white film built up in here, in which case that will need to be addressed and it may need to be pumped. We also look in this PVC channel here to make sure that wastewater is not reaching the top of that channel and bypassing over the edge. In the event that it's bypassing over the edge, it indicates that the system, there may be a clog or it needs to be pumped. In this case, the effluent appears to be clean. As it is leaving the system, it comes through a chlorination disinfection system, also known as a chlorinator tube, which is a PVC tube. You will actually stock that PVC tube with wastewater specific chlorine, which is different from swimming pool chlorine in that it is formulated to break down in the environment faster, so it's more environmentally friendly. As it leaves the system, it goes through that pipe and discharges out.